Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers voluntariness, consent searches, and anonymous tips, and is brought to us by Lance Thornton's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Babbel. Spring is here, and now is the time to step out of your hibernation den and get ready to travel. Immersing yourself in an unfamiliar culture is one of the most rewarding and enlightening experiences that you can have. And knowing another language opens the door to so many opportunities for personal growth and development. Learning a new language has helped me connect with creators and brands from all over the world and establish new relationships that I wouldn't have been able to make without Babbel's easily digestible lessons. Babbel's award-winning technology is scientifically proven to help you start learning a new language in as little as 3 weeks, utilizing short 10-minute interactive lessons developed by real language teachers, not learning algorithms or AI. Thanks to Babbel's speech recognition feature, learning French has been très facile, and I'm learning new, fun, and practical phrases every day. Right now, Babbel is offering members of the ATA community a 60% discount when you click on the link in the description. With a 20-day money-back guarantee, you have absolutely nothing to lose. So, click on the link in the description and start your language learning journey today. Thanks again to Babbel for sponsoring this episode. On the morning of March 12, 2023, officers from the Erie Police Department SWAT team, Pennsylvania State Police Fugitive Task Force, and U.S. Marshals arrived at the Erie, Pennsylvania home of 52-year-old Lance Thornton, who suffers from early onset dementia. Mr. Thornton's doorbell camera captured footage of the officers removing it from its installation location and throwing it into Mr. Thornton's yard, after which the officers knocked on the door. When Mr. Thornton, who was sleeping at the time, did not get to the door quickly enough, they started to break down the door. Mr. Thornton came to the door before they broke it down completely, and the officers asked him to step outside. After explaining that he suffered from dementia, Mr. Thornton took out his cell phone and began to film the encounter.
We're not here for you.
Then I'm being told to put my phone down. I was told I had a right to pull it. That is my rental car. What is going? You're not allowed inside. I want to know what's going on.
I'm going to tell you what's going on.
Then you tell me right now.
Relax.
No, this is my house.
Relax.
No, you're gonna.
Talk to you right now.
No.
That's who we're looking for. He in your house right now? Is he in your house right now?
No, there's nobody in my house.
Wanted for attempted homicide, 3 officers. Okay, so that's why we're here. We're not here for anything else. We're here for that. That's
okay.
It. You got my word.
All right.
Can we go in and look to make sure he's not in there?
No, I swear to you right now. Okay, right now.
Do you know him?
No, I don't know him. I do not like your attitude and the way you came across. Because I said, I'm going to pull my phone out of my pocket, and you said yes. When I said I'm going to start recording, you told me to turn it off.
We have our router cameras on. We're recording right now too.
I'm going to get every one of these because I do not know what's going on here.
Listen, this guy's wanted for attempted homicide, 3 officers. Okay, a tip came in and this guy is staying at your house. Understand? Over the weekend.
Who are you guys with?
U.S. Marshals, EPD SWAT.
What's
PSP,
EPD?
Erie Police Department.
Okay, keep going.
And PSP.
What's PSP?
Pennsylvania State Police.
Okay, I'm shaking right now. Right now, if this is true, what you're telling me,
yes,
I give you full permission, full run of my house.
Do you know this guy?
Sir, I already answered that question, asked and answered.
But here's the thing, there's a reason why this tip was called into the marshals. There's a connection between you and this guy. Now, it might not be directly. Okay, do you have a girlfriend?
Just hear him out. Just hear him
My
out.
wife is an ER doctor.
Who's your wife? Is there another girl, woman that stays here? A girl?
No.
Nobody else?
No.
Okay, who?
My daughter.
Okay, where does she stay at?
She lives in Washington, D.C. This is my daughter?
We don't know. Okay, again, this is a tip that's called into to the U.S. Marshals and PSP hotline. Okay, saying that this guy is staying here at your house right now. This weekend.
Go inside, guys. Go inside.
Well, we will in a second. We have to go more than just 2 guys, but that's why we're here is to show force we are.
Who's fixing my door? Because you broke it the way you kicked it.
It's not broken.
No,
door?
I saw the inside.
The door?
Yes, whoever was kicking that door when I was coming downstairs peacefully, you had to hear my feet coming. Someone's paying for this, so go ahead, do your thing.
That's fine.
Do your job, because you have me so scared right now and so mad.
That. I appreciate that.
Do you guys have a warrant, by the way?
Homicide warrant, yes.
No. Do you have a warrant from a house? I'm just asking so I know.
No, you don't have a search warrant for your house.
You do not have a...
You gave us consent to get
I'm giving you consent, but I can withdraw it at any time, right?
You don't have a search warrant for your house.
Because I'm scared right now.
We are not taking anything in your house. You don't want anything in your house but this individual.
Yep.
Just go up.
The officers inform Mr. Thornton that although they do not have a search warrant for his home, they can enter because they have his consent, which the officers believe to be valid, despite the fact that Mr. Thornton informed him that he has dementia. In the 1981 case of Stigold versus United States, the Supreme Court determined that the warrantless entry into a home to arrest a non-resident violated the Fourth Amendment, despite the fact that the officers had an arrest warrant, because, quote, absent exigent circumstances or consent, an entry into a private dwelling to conduct a search or effect an arrest is unreasonable without a warrant. Now, while the court noted that the arrest warrant would permit the officers to enter the suspect's own residence, it determined that it did not authorize the officers to enter someone else's home in order to arrest the suspect when the homeowner did not consent, the officers were not in hot pursuit of the suspect, and no other exigent circumstances existed. Therefore, because the officers did not have a warrant to enter Mr. Thornton's residence and no exigent circumstances appeared to exist, the officers could not enter Mr. Thornton's home without his consent. As the Supreme Court explained in the 2006 case of Georgia versus Randolph, one exception to the rule prohibiting the warrantless entry of a person's house, quote, recognizes the validity of searches with the voluntary consent of an individual possessing authority. The Supreme Court held in the 1973 case of Schneckloth versus Bustamante that, quote, it is only by analyzing all the circumstances of an individual consent that it can be ascertained whether in fact it was voluntary or coerced, and that, quote, examining all the surrounding circumstances to determine if in fact the consent to search was coerced, account must be taken of subtly coercive police questions, as well as the possibly vulnerable subjective state of the person who consents. However, it is important to note that when analyzing whether a consent to search was given voluntarily, courts focus primarily on the officer's understanding of the situation, rather than whether or not the individual actually consented. For instance, in the 2005 case of U.S. versus Guerrero, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals noted that, quote, the focus is not whether Guerrero subjectively consented, but rather whether a reasonable officer would believe consent was given. In the 2020 case of U.S. versus Quesada Laura, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals noted that, quote, our cases have never required perfect mental ability to find a consent to search was voluntary, and ultimately determined that a consent to search was valid despite an individual's dementia because, quote, the extent of his impairment at the time of his consent to search was not severe, and the agents involved in obtaining the consent testified that, quote, no aspect of the dysfunction was apparent to them. So based on this precedent, it seems most probable that a court would determine that the officers reasonably believed Mr. Thornton's consent was voluntary based on his demeanor and apparent understanding of the situation and his rights. However, the officers were on notice that Mr. Thornton suffered from dementia, and he repeatedly stated that he was scared and confused. So it is also possible that a court could conclude that his consent was not effective. Although, given the low standard required to prove voluntariness, this outcome seems unlikely.
Ambulances, a SWAT truck, lots of cars, and a rude officer. What's the relationship with my daughter?
I'll explain it. I'm not with this going on. Okay.
Why? This is total transparency because I'm just getting you permission to walk into my house. I can withdraw it right now. So you tell me now where I withdraw it. I'm going to draw this consent. Sirs, get out of my house. I'm withdrawing consent. I am withdrawing consent. Do you now hear it? You're on camera. They're still moving forward.
You want to understand?
They're still going in. I withdrew my consent, and you guys even knew I could do it. They're still searching. I already told them out.
You can't go back and forth saying you let us in, you don't let us in.
I said, can I withdraw consent? And you said yes on camera.
Yes, you can. Yes.
And I did. I not just withdraw it.
So I'm telling you what's going on.
Right now, they're doing an illegal search of my house.
Hey, Steve, the homeowner's saying we don't have consent now.
I have Alzheimer's. I have dementia right now, and I'm really scared.
Okay. Well, there's no reason to be scared. We're not here.
I told him to stop the consent until I got the truth, and you already told him, and it's still searching my house.
Here's the thing.
I have enough security cameras in there. They're all scared. They heard me withdraw consent, and they're still continuing in there after I withdraw it.
Mr. Thornton argues that the officers are searching his home illegally because they continued to search after he withdrew his consent. The Supreme Court has not expressly established that an individual may withdraw consent to search that they have voluntarily given. However, in the 1980 case of Walter versus United States, the court explained that, quote, when an official search is properly authorized, whether by consent or by the issuance of a valid warrant, the scope of the search is limited by the terms of its authorization. And in the 1991 case of Florida versus Gimeno, it stated that, quote, a suspect may, of course, delimit as he chooses the scope of the search to which he consents. Based in part on this precedent, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Pennsylvania, held in the 2018 case of United States versus Williams that the subject of a consensual search may terminate the search by withdrawing their consent, noting that, quote, our sister circuits that have considered whether individuals may withdraw consent to search have unanimously answered in the affirmative, and citing decisions from the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th circuits recognizing the right to withdraw consent. The Third Circuit also clarified that once an individual has voluntarily consented to a search, they can only withdraw their consent through, quote, an act or statement that an objective viewer would understand as an expression of his desire to no longer be searched. Here, Mr. Thornton unequivocally revoked his consent by explicitly stating that he was withdrawing his consent multiple times, and a court would almost certainly determine that the officers violated the Fourth Amendment by continuing to search his home after hearing these statements.
Because I want the truth. I
told you the truth. What do you mean? I'm not telling you the truth.
Let me finish, and I apologize. I'm getting frustrated. Okay. I'm standing out here in the cold in pajamas. I said, I'm going to reach in my pocket. I'm going to grab my phone.
Yes.
And I was told yes. And then I said, I'm going to start recording. And then I started hearing officers tell me, no, put the phone away. I'm not allowed to record. I have all this going on. And then they still continue to go through there after knowing right now they're doing an illegal search.
Here's the thing. I radioed to them to tell them to stop.
I stood right here. They stared at me when I told them I withdraw consent. Okay. So right now, my Fourth Amendment is being violated.
This has, like I told you, this has to do with a wanted person who's wanted for attempted
homicide.
Right. We received a tip through Crime Stoppers regarding this. Okay. And the tip said that person was at your residence from this weekend.
The officers informed Mr. Thornton that they received an anonymous Crime Stoppers tip that the suspect was staying at Mr. Thornton's house, and that the tip was the basis for their search. In the 1983 case of Illinois versus Gates, the Supreme Court held that when determining whether an anonymous tip gives rise to the probable cause necessary to issue a warrant, courts must apply a totality of the circumstances analysis that considers an informant's so-called veracity, reliability, and basis of knowledge. In reaching this conclusion, the court reasoned that, quote, informants' tips doubtless come in many shapes and sizes from many different types of persons. And, quote, informants' tips, like all other clues and evidence coming to a policeman on the scene, may vary greatly in their value and reliability. Applying this precedent to a Terry stop, the Supreme Court concluded in the 1990 case of Alabama versus White that because, quote, an anonymous tip alone seldom demonstrates the informant's basis of knowledge or veracity, and given that, quote, the veracity of persons supplying anonymous tips is by hypothesis largely unknown and unknowable, an uncorroborated anonymous tip standing alone, quote, would not warrant a man of reasonable caution in the belief that a stop was appropriate. Although the court clarified that, quote, this is not to say that an anonymous caller could never provide the reasonable suspicion necessary for a Terry stop, it also noted that, quote, some tips completely lacking in indicia of reliability would either warrant no police response or require further investigation before a forcible stop of a suspect would be authorized. Based on the information available, it seems highly likely that a court would conclude that the Crime Stoppers tip alone did not give the officers the probable cause they needed to obtain a warrant to search Mr. Thornton's home, or even reasonable suspicion for that matter, as the anonymous tipster seemed to simply assert that the suspect was staying there without any additional information that could be used to assess the credibility of the tip. In fact, in an interview with the Real News Network about the incident, Mr. Thornton reported that the officers had applied for a warrant before coming to his home, and it was denied by the judge for a lack of probable cause.
Right now, there's an illegal search going on in my house. That's what I care about, because I wanted them out. I totally respect your position. I totally respect what you're doing. I know you guys are scared. You guys, somebody wanted, but I do not understand the show of force and the aggressiveness towards me because this is my home. I gave you my medical condition, and you guys still are doing this. See, and they're upstairs now. You said they're on their way out.
After completing their search of Mr. Thornton's home and not finding the suspect, the officers eventually left. According to a GoFundMe campaign started by Mr. Thornton's daughter, as a result of the officers' actions, Mr. Thornton's front door could not be securely shut or locked, and his doorbell camera was broken. The GoFundMe also reports that the carpet in 2 bedrooms was ruined by a dark substance that looked like paint or tar that seemed to have been tracked in on one of the officers' shoes. Following the interaction, Mr. Thornton filed a request for the body camera footage and other material related to the interaction, but his request was denied after a lengthy exchange with the Pennsylvania State Police, who directed Mr. Thornton to file his request with the U.S. Marshal Services, as they were the lead authority on the scene at the time. As of the writing of this episode, Mr. Thornton has not received any body camera footage related to this incident. Mr. Thornton also suffered a stroke shortly after this encounter, which he believes to be a direct result of this interaction. Overall, the officers get an F for destroying Mr. Thornton's personal property, failing to properly account for Mr. Thornton's dementia diagnosis, and violating the Fourth Amendment by continuing to search Mr. Thornton's home after he withdrew the consent that was the sole basis of their authority to enter his home. When reviewing this encounter, it is important to keep in mind that because the officers had been denied a warrant, they were engaged in what should have been a so-called consensual encounter with Mr. Thornton. And while the Supreme Court has held that officers may approach the door of a home and knock, just as any private citizen might do, the scope of this invitation clearly does not include destroying the homeowner's doorbell camera to avoid being filmed, or breaking in their door if they do not respond quickly enough. Additionally, although I cannot say for certain whether the officers were knowingly attempting to take advantage of Mr. Thornton's mental state, at best, they ignored it, along with his repeated assertions that he was confused and afraid, and continued in their relentless pursuit of a suspect who was not inside Mr. Thornton's home or even known to him. Now, while I understand that the officers were hoping to find a dangerous criminal, their uncompromising focus on capturing the fugitive caused them to terrify a citizen with dementia and infringe upon his constitutional rights, which is particularly egregious given the fact that Mr. Thornton did not even know the man they were looking for, and was certainly not harboring him in his home. This interaction demonstrates how officers can trample on the rights of innocent citizens when they are more concerned with results rather than abiding by the limitations the Constitution places on their authority. As for Mr. Thornton, I cannot rightfully assign a grade to a man with dementia who was simply the victim of police overreach. While the courts may not recognize that Mr. Thornton's dementia rendered his consent involuntary, I am certain that his condition made this interaction incredibly challenging to navigate, and, as he repeatedly informed the officers, confusing and frightening. That being said, there were many things that Mr. Thornton did right in this encounter, despite his diagnosis, and I want to commend him for his attempts to defend his Fourth Amendment rights, however fruitless they ultimately proved, as well as his choice to film the interaction and share it with the public on YouTube. I would also like to take this opportunity to encourage him to continue to advocate for his constitutional rights by filing complaints and pursuing a lawsuit against the officers and agencies involved in this encounter. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic that you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.